The Cessna 172 Skyhawk is a four-seat, single-engine, high-wing, fixed-wing aircraft made by the Cessna Aircraft Company. First flown in 1955, more Cessna 172s have been built than any other aircraft. Design and development, measured by its longevity and popularity, the Cessna 172 is the most successful aircraft in history. Cessna delivered the first production models in 1956. As of 2012, Cessna, and its partners, had built around 60,000. The Skyhawk's main competitors have been the Beechcraft Musketeer and Grumman AA-5 series, the Piper Cherokee, and, more recently, the Diamond DA-40. The Cessna 172 started life as a tricycle landing gear variant of the tail-dragger Cessna 170, with a basic level of standard equipment. In January 1955, Cessna flew an improved variant of the Cessna 170, a Continental O300A-powered Cessna 170C with larger elevators and a more angular tail fin. Although the variant was tested and certified, Cessna decided to modify it with a tricycle landing gear, and the modified Cessna 170C flew again on June 12, 1955. To reduce the time and cost of certification, the type was added to the Cessna 170 type certificate as the Model 172. Later, the 172 was given its own type certificate, 3A12. The 172 became an overnight sales success, and over 1,400 were built in 1956, its first full year of production. Early 172s were similar in appearance to the 170s, with the same straight aft fuselage and tall landing gear legs, although the 172 had a straight tail fin while the 170 had a rounded fin and rudder. Later 172 versions incorporated revised landing gear and the swept-back tail fin, which is still in use today. The final aesthetic development, in the mid-1960s, was a lowered rear deck allowing an aft window. Cessna advertised this added rear visibility as OmniVision. Cessna has not changed the airframe configuration since then, except for updates in avionics and engines, including the Garmin G1000 glass cockpit in 2005. Production halted in the mid-1980s, but resumed in 1996 with the 160 HP Cessna 172 a Skyhawk. Cessna supplemented this in 1998 with the 180 HP Cessna 172 a Skyhawk SP. Modifications: the Cessna 172 may be modified via a wide array of supplemental type certificates, including increased engine power and higher gross weights. Available STC engine modifications increase power from 180 to 210 HP, add constant speed propellers, or allow the use of automobile gasoline. Other modifications include additional fuel tank capacity in the wing tips, added baggage compartment tanks, added wheel pants to reduce drag, or enhanced landing and takeoff performance and safety with a STOL kit. Operational history: a Cessna 172 was used in 1958 to set the world record for flight endurance. The record still stands. On December 4, 1958, Robert Tim and John Cook took off from McCarran Airfield in Las Vegas, Nevada in a newly built Cessna 172, registration number N9172B. 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes and 5 seconds later, they landed back at McCarran Airfield on February 4, 1959. The flight was part of a fundraising effort for the Damon Runyon Cancer Fund. Food and water were transferred by matching speeds with the chase car on a straight stretch of road in the desert, and hoisting the supplies aboard with a rope and bucket. Fuel was taken on by hoisting a hose from a fuel truck up to the aircraft, filling an auxiliary belly tank installed for the flight, pumping that fuel into the aircraft's regular tanks and then filling the belly tank again. The driver steered while a second person matched speeds with the aircraft with his foot on the vehicle's accelerator pedal. Engine oil was added by means of a tube from the cabin that was fitted to pass through the firewall. Only the pilot's seat was installed. The remaining space was used for a pad on which the relief pilot slept. The right cabin door was replaced with an easy-opening, accordion-type door to allow supplies and fuel to be hoisted aboard. Early in the flight, the engine-driven electric generator failed. A Champion wind-driven generator was hoisted aboard, taped to the wing support strut, and plugged into the cigarette lighter socket. It served as the aircraft's source of electricity for the rest of the flight. The pilots decided to end the marathon flight because with 1,558 hours of continuously running the engine during the record-setting flight, plus several hundred hours already on the engine beforehand, the engine's power output had deteriorated to the point where they were barely able to climb away after refueling. The aircraft is on display in the passenger terminal at McCarran International Airport. Photos and details of the record flight can be seen in a small museum on the upper level of the baggage claim area. After the flight, Cook said, "OE next time I feel in the mood to fly endurance, I'm going to lock myself in a garbage can with a vacuum cleaner running. That is, until my psychiatrist opens up for business in the morning." Variants 172. The basic 172 appeared in November 1955 as the 1956 model and remained in production until replaced by the 172A in early 1960. It was equipped with the Continental 0300 145 HP 6-cylinder, air-cooled engine and had a maximum gross weight of 2,200 lb. Introductory base price was $8,995 and a total of 4,195 were constructed over the 5 years. 172A, the 1960 model 172A introduced a swept-back tailfin and rudder, as well as float fittings. The price was $9,450 and 1,015 were built. 172B, the 172B was introduced in late 1960 as the 1961 model and featured a shorter landing gear, engine mounts lengthened 3 inches, a reshaped cowling, and a pointed propeller spinner. For the first time, the Skyhawk name was applied to an available deluxe option package. This added optional equipment included full exterior paint to replace the standard partial paint stripes and standard avionics. The gross weight was increased to 2,250 lb. 172C, the 1962 model was the 172C. It brought to the line an optional autopilot and a key starter to replace the previous pull starter. The seats were redesigned to be 6-way adjustable. A child seat was made optional to allow 2 children to be carried in the baggage area. The 1962 price was $9,895. A total of 889 172C models were produced. 172D, the 1963 172D model introduced the lower rear fuselage with a wraparound Omni-Vision rear window and a one-piece windshield. New rudder and brake pedals were also added. 1,146 172DS were built. 1963 also saw the introduction of the 172D Powermatic. This was equipped with the Continental GO300E producing 175 horsepower and a cruise speed 11 mph faster than the standard 172D. In reality this was not a new model, but a Cessna 175 Skylark that had been renamed for its last year of production. The Skylark had gained a reputation for poor engine reliability and the renaming of it as a 172 was a marketing attempt to regain sales through rebranding. The move was not a success and neither the 1963 Powermatic nor the Skylark were produced again after the 1963 model year. 172E. The 172E was the 1964 model. The electrical fuses were replaced with circuit breakers. Gross weight was increased to 2,300 lb where it would stay until the 172P. The 172E also featured a redesigned instrument panel. 1,401 172s were built that year as production continued to increase. 172F, the 1965 model 172F introduced electrically operated flaps to replace the previous lever-operated system. It was built in France by Reims Cessna as the F-172 until 1971. These models formed the basis for the U.S. Air Force's T-41A Mescalero primary trainer, which was used during the 1960s and early 1970s as initial flight screening aircraft in USAF undergraduate pilot training. Following their removal from the UPT program, some extant USAF T-41s were assigned to the U.S. Air Force Academy for the Cadet Pilot Indoctrination Program, while others were distributed to Air Force Aero Clubs. A total of 1,436 172FS were completed. 172G. The 1966 model year 172G introduced a more pointed spinner and sold for $12,450 in its basic 172 version and $13,300 in the upgraded Skyhawk version. 1,597 were built. 172H. The 1967 model 172H was the last Continental O300 powered model. It also introduced a shorter stroke nose gear Leo to reduce drag and improve the appearance of the aircraft in flight. A new cowling was used, introducing shock mounts that transmitted lower noise levels to the cockpit and reduced cowl cracking. The electric stall warning horn was replaced by a pneumatic one. The 1967 model 172H sold for $10,950 while the Skyhawk version was $12,750. 839 were built that year, representing the first year that production was less than the year before. 172I. The 1968 model marked the beginning of the Lycoming-powered 172s. The familiar 172 needed to be re-engined because Cessna had cancelled its contract with Continental for their venerable O300 six-cylinder engine of 145 HP. The I model was introduced with a Lycoming O320 E2D engine of 150 HP, an increase of 5 HP over the Continental power plant. The increased power resulted in an increase in optimal cruise from 130 mph TAS to 131 mph TAS. There was no change in the sea level rate of climb at 645 ft per minute. The 172I also introduced the first standard T instrument arrangement. The 172I saw an increase in production to record levels with 1,206 built. 172J, the Cessna Company planned to drop the previous 172 configuration for the 1968 model year and replace it with a cantilever wing stabilator configuration that would be the 172J. However, as time for model introduction neared, those dealers who were aware of the change began applying pressure on the factory to continue the previous configuration. They felt the new model would be less usable as a trainer. Consequently, and at the last minute, the decision was made to continue the 172 in its original configuration. The planned 172J configuration would be introduced as a new model, the 177. The deluxe option would become the 177 Cardinal. The J designation was never publicly used. 172K, the next model year was the 1969K model. The 1969 172K had a redesigned tailfin cap and reshaped rear windows. Optional long-range 52 gal wing fuel tanks were offered. The rear windows were slightly enlarged by 16 square inches. The 1969 model sold for $12,500 for the 172 and $13,995 for the Skyhawk, with 1,170 made. The 1970 model was still called the 172K, but sported fiberglass, downward-shaped, conical wingtips. Fully articulated seats were offered as well. Production in 1970 was 759 units. 172L. The 172L, sold during 1971 and 1972, replaced the main landing gear legs with tapered, tubular steel gear legs. The new gear had a width that was increased by 12 in. The new tubular gear was lighter, but required aerodynamic fairings to maintain the same speed and climb performance as experienced with a flat steel design. The L also had a plastic fairing between the dorsal fin and vertical fin to introduce a greater family resemblance to the 182's vertical fin. The 1971 model sold for $13,425 in the 172 version and $14,995 in the Skyhawk version. 827 172LS were sold in 1971 and 984 in 1972. 172M. the 172M of 1973 a Euro 76 gained a drooped wing leading edge for improved low-speed handling. This was marketed as the camber lift wing. The 1974 172M was also the first to introduce the optional 2 package which offered higher standard equipment, including a second Navcom radio, an ADF and transponder. The baggage compartment was increased in size and nose-mounted dual landing lights were available as an option. The 1975 Model 172M sold for $16,055 for the 172, $17,890 for the Skyhawk and $20,335 for the Skyhawk II. In 1976, Cessna stopped marketing the aircraft as the 172 and began exclusively using the Skyhawk designation. This model year also saw a redesigned instrument panel to hold more avionics. Among other changes, the fuel and other small gauges are relocated to the left side for improved pilot readability compared with the earlier 172 panel designs. Total production of M models was 7306 over the 4 years it was manufactured. 172N, the Skyhawk N, or Skyhawk/100 as Cessna termed it, was introduced for the 1977 model year. The 100 designation indicated that it was powered by a Lycoming 0320H2AD, 160 horsepower engine designed to run on 100-octane fuel, whereas all previous engines used 80/87 fuel. Unfortunately, this engine proved troublesome and it was replaced by the similarly rated 0320D2J to create the 1981 172P. The 1977N Model 172 also introduced rudder trim as an option and standard pre-selectable flaps. The price was $22,300, with the Skyhawk/102 selling for $29,950. The 1978 model brought a 28-volt electrical system to replace the previous 14-volt system. Air conditioning was an option. The 1979 Model N increased the flap extension speed for the first 10 degrees to 115 knots. Larger wing tanks increased the optional fuel to 66 US gallons. The N remained in production until 1980 when the 172P or Skyhawk P was introduced. 172O, there was no O Model 172. 172P, the 172P, or Skyhawk P, was introduced in 1981 to solve the reliability problems of the N engine. The Lycoming 0320D2J was a great improvement. The P model also saw the maximum flap deflection decreased from 40 degrees to 30 to allow a gross weight increase from 2,300 lb to 2,400 lb. A wet wing was optional, with a capacity of 62 US gallons of fuel. The price of a new Skyhawk P was $33,950, with the Skyhawk P2 costing $37,810 and the Navpac-equipped Skyhawk P2 selling for $42,460. In 1982, the P saw the landing lights moved from the nose to the wing to increase bulb life. The 1983 model added some minor soundproofing improvements and thicker windows. A second door latch pin was introduced in 1984. Production of the P ended in 1986 and no more 172s were built for 11 years as legal liability rulings in the USA had pushed Cessna's insurance costs too high, resulting in dramatically increasing prices for new aircraft. There were only 195 172s built in 1984, a rate of fewer than 4 per week. 172Q Cutlass. The 172Q was introduced in 1983 and given the name Cutlass to create an affiliation with the 172RG, although it was actually a 172P with a Lycoming 0360A4N engine of 180 horsepower. The aircraft had a gross weight of 2,550 lb and an optimal cruise speed of 122 knots compared to the 172P's cruise speed of 120 knots on 20 HP less. It had a useful load that was about 100 lb more than the Skyhawk P and a rate of climb that was actually 20 feet per minute lower, due to the higher gross weight. Production ended after only 3 years when all 172 production stopped. 172R, The Skyhawk R was introduced in 1996 and is powered by a derated Lycoming IO360L2A producing a maximum of 160 horsepower at just 2,400 RPMs. This is the first Cessna 172 to have a factory-fitted fuel-injected engine. The 172R's maximum takeoff weight is 2,450 lb. This model year introduced many improvements, including a new interior with soundproofing, an all-new multi-level ventilation system, a standard 4-point intercom, contoured, energy-absorbing, 26G front seats with vertical and reclining adjustments and inertia reel harnesses. 172S. The Cessna 172S was introduced in 1998 and is powered by a Lycoming IO360L2A producing 180 horsepower. The maximum engine RPM was increased from 2,400 RPMs to 2,700 RPMs, resulting in a 20 HP increase over the A model. As a result, the maximum takeoff weight was increased to 2,550 lb. This model is marketed under the name Skyhawk SP, although the type certification data sheet specifies it as a 172S. The 172S is built primarily for the private owner-operator and is, in its later years, offered with the Garmin G1000 avionics package and leather seats as standard equipment. As of 2009, only the S model is in production. Cessna 172RG Cutlass. Cessna introduced a retractable landing gear version of the 172 in 1980 and named it the Cutlass 172RG. The Cutlass featured a variable pitch, constant speed propeller and a more powerful Lycoming O360 F1A6 engine of 180 horsepower. The 172RG sold for about $19,000 more than the standard 172 of the same year and produced an optimal cruise speed of 140 knots, compared to 122 knots for the contemporary 160 horsepower version. The 172RG did not find wide acceptance in the personal aircraft market because of higher additional initial and operating costs accompanied by mediocre cruising speed, but was adopted by many flight schools since it met the specific requirements for complex aircraft experience necessary to obtain a commercial pilot certificate, at relatively low cost. Between 1980 and 1984 1177RGs were built, with a small number following before production ceased in 1985. While numbered and marketed as a 172, the 172RG was actually certified on the Cessna 175 type certificate. Reams FR-172J and Cessna R-172K Hawk XP. The FR-172J Reams rocket was produced by Reams Aviation in France from the late 60s to the mid-70s. It was powered by a Rolls-Royce built, fuel-injected, Continental IO360D 210 HP engine with a constant speed propeller. The Reams rocket led to Cessna producing the AR-172K Hawk XP, a model available from 1977 to 1981 from both Wichita and Reams. This configuration featured a fuel-injected, Continental IO360K derated to 195 HP with a two-bladed, constant-speed propeller. The Hawk XP was capable of a 131-knot cruise speed. Owners claimed that the increased performance of the XP didn't compensate for its increased purchase price and the higher operating costs associated with the larger engine. The aircraft was well accepted for use on floats, however, as the standard 172 is not a strong float plane, even with only 2 people on board, while the XP's extra power improves water takeoff performance dramatically. While numbered and marketed as 172s, the AR-172J and AR-172K models are actually certified on the Cessna 175 type certificate. Turbo's Skyhawk JTA, model introduced in July 2014 for 2015 customer deliveries, powered by a 155 HP Continental CD155 diesel engine installed by the factory under a supplemental type certificate. Initial retail price is over $420,000. The model has a top speed of 131 kn and burns 3 US gallons less fuel than the standard 172. This model is a development of the proposed and then cancelled Skyhawk TD. In reviewing this new model, Paul Bertolli of AVWEB said, "EA unregistered trademark. I'm sure Cessna will find some sales for the Skyhawk JTA, but at $420,000, ETA unregistered trademark is hard to see how it will ignite much market expansion just because ETA unregistered trademark is a Cessna. It gives away $170,000 to the near-new Redbird Redhawk conversion, which is a lot of change to pay merely for the smell of a new airplane. Diesel engines cost more than twice as much to manufacture as gasoline engines do, and although their fuel efficiency gains back some of that investment, if the complete aircraft package is too pricey, the debt service will eat up any savings, making a new aircraft not just unattractive, but unaffordable." I haven't unregistered trademark T run the numbers on the JTA yet, but I can tell from previous analysis that there are definite limits. Cancelled model, 172TD. On October 4, 2007, Cessna announced its plan to build a diesel-powered model, to be designated the 172 Skyhawk TD starting in mid-2008. The planned engine was to be a Thielert Centurion 2.0, liquid-cooled, 2-liter displacement, dual overhead cam, 4-cylinder, inline, turbo diesel with full authority digital engine control with an output of 155 HP and burning Jet A fuel. In July 2013, the 172TD model was cancelled due to Thielert's bankruptcy. The aircraft was later refined into the turbo Skyhawk JTA, slated for deliveries in 2015. Simulator company Redbird Simulations will use the same engine and reconditioned 172 airframes to produce a similar model to be called the Redbird Redhawk. Premier Aircraft Sales also announced in February 2014 that it would offer refurbished 172 airframes equipped with the Continental Thielert Centurion 2.0 diesel engine. Future models, electric-powered 172. In July 2010, Cessna announced it was developing an electrically powered 172 as a proof of concept in partnership with BioEnergy. In July 2011, BioEnergy, whose name had been changed to Beyond Aviation, announced the prototype had commenced taxi tests on July 22, 2011, and a first flight would follow soon. In 2012, the prototype, using Panasys batteries, engaged in multiple successful test flights. Military operators, a variant of the 172, the T-41 Mescalero was used as a trainer with the United States Air Force and Army. In addition, the United States Border Patrol uses a fleet of 172s for aerial surveillance along the Mexico-US border. The Irish Air Corps uses the Reims version for aerial surveillance and monitoring of cache, prisoner and explosive escorts, in addition to Army cooperation and pilot training roles. For T-41 operators, see T-41 Mescalero, a Austria, Austrian Air Force 1 A, 172, a Bolivia, Bolivian Air Force 3 A, 172K, a Chile, Chilean Army 18 A, 172K, a Ecuador, Ecuadorian Air Force 8 A, 172F, Ecuadorian Army 1 A, 172G, a Guatemala, Guatemalan Air Force 6 A, 172K, a Honduras, Honduran Air Force 3, Iraq. Iraqi Air Force, an Ireland, Irish Air Corps 8 A, FR-172H, 1A, FR-172K5, FR-172H remain in service as of 2014. A Liberia, Air Reconnaissance Unit 2, a Lithuania, State Border Guard Service, a Madagascar, Malagasy Air Force 4A, 172M, a Pakistan, Pakistan Air Force 4A, 172N, a Philippines, Philippine Army, Philippine Navy 1A, 172F, 1A, 172N, a Saudi Arabia, Royal Saudi Air Force 8A, F-172G, 4A, F-172H, 4A, F-172M, a Singapore, Republic of Singapore Air Force 8A, 172K, delivered 1969 and retired. 1972. Accidents and incidents. On October 23, 1964, David Box, lead singer for the Crickets on their 1960 release version of Peggy Sue Got Married, and Don't Car No, and later a solo artist, was killed when the Cessna 172 he was aboard crashed in northwest Harris County, Texas while en route to a performance. Box was the second lead vocalist for the Crickets to die in a plane crash after Buddy Holly. On August 31, 1969, Rocky Marciano was killed when the Cessna 172 in which he was a passenger crashed on approach to an airfield outside Newton, Iowa. On September 25, 1978, a Cessna 172, N7711G, collided with Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 182, a Boeing 727. The two aircraft crashed over San Diego, California. There were a total of 144 fatalities, 2 in the Cessna 172, 135 on the PSA Flight 182 and 7 on the ground. On May 28, 1987, a rented Reims Cessna F-172P, registered DECJB, was used by a German teenage pilot Matthias Rust to fly an unauthorized flight from Helsinki-Malmi Airport through Soviet airspace to land near the Red Square in Moscow, all without being intercepted by Soviet air defense. On April 9, 1990, Atlantic Southeast Airlines Flight 2254, an Embraer AN-120 Brasilia, collided head-on with a Civil Air Patrol Cessna 172, AN-99501, while en route from Gadsden Municipal Airport to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The Cessna crashed, killing 2 occupants, but the Brasilia made a safe emergency landing. On January 5, 2002, high school student Charles J. Bishop stole a Cessna 172, N2371N, and intentionally crashed it into the side of the Bank of America Tower in downtown Tampa, Florida, killing only himself and otherwise causing very little damage. On April 6, 2009, a Cessna 172N, CGFJH, was stolen by a student from Confederation College in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada and entered United States airspace over Lake Superior. The plane was intercepted and followed by NORAD F-16s, finally landing on Highway 60 in Elsinore, Missouri after a 7-hour flight. The student pilot, a Canadian citizen born in Turkey, Adam Dylan Leon, formerly known as Yavuz Burke, was suffering from depression and attempted to commit suicide by being shot down. Instead, he was arrested shortly after landing. On November 3, 2009, he was sentenced to 2 years in a U.S. federal prison after he pleaded guilty in August 2009 to all 3 charges against him: interstate transportation of a stolen aircraft, importation of a stolen aircraft, and illegal entry. College procedures at the time permitted students access to aircraft and the keys were routinely left in the aircraft. On October 9, 2013, the passenger of GBCY made a successful emergency landing at Humberside Airport, United Kingdom following the death of its pilot in flight. The passenger had no flying experience and was talked down by flying instructors. He had been on a local flight from Sandtoft Airfield, Lincolnshire when the pilot died. The incident formed the basis of a documentary broadcast in the United Kingdom by Channel 4 on March 27, 2014. Specifications. Data from Cessna, General Characteristics, Crew, 1, Capacity, 3 passengers, Length, 27 ft 2 in, Wingspan, 36 ft 1 in, Height, 8 ft 11 in, Wing Area, 174 sq-ft, Aspect Ratio, 7.32, Airfoil, Modified NACA 2412, Empty Weight, 1,691 lb, Gross Weight, 2,450 lb, Fuel Capacity, 56 US gallons, Power Plant, 1 Lycoming IO360L2A 4-cylinder, horizontally opposed aircraft engine, 160 HP. Propellers, 2-bladed metal, Performance, Cruise speed, 122 kn, Stall speed, 47 kn, Never exceed speed, 163 kn, Range, 696 nmi with 45-minute reserve, 55% power, at 12,000 feet, service ceiling, 13,500 ft, rate of climb, 721 a foot per minute, wing loading, 14.1 lbs/ft, avionics, optional Garmin G1000 primary flight display, See also. Related development, Cessna 150, Cessna 152, Cessna 170, Cessna 175, T-41 Mescalero, aircraft of comparable role, configuration and era, Beechcraft Musketeer, Diamond DA-40, Grumman Cheetah, Piper Cherokee. Related lists, list of aircraft, list of civil aircraft, list of most produced aircraft, references. Andrade, John. Millite Air 1982. London, Aviation Press Limited. ISBN A0-907898-01-7 Jackson, Paul. Jane's All the World's Aircraft 2003 Euro 2004. Coulston, UK, Jane's Information Group. ISBN A0-7106-2537-5 External links, Cessna Skyhawk 172 SP website, complete specifications and data for each Cessna 172 model year.